Then you have the Apostolic Fathers' confirmation of this message. Now, who were the Apostolic Fathers? Well, they were students of the apostles. So take, for example, the Apostle John. He had 3 students in the latest years of his life: Papias, Polycarp, and Ignatius. These students carefully wrote down the teachings of John, again, someone who was an eyewitness to Jesus, and they constantly reaffirmed this message that Jesus existed. And then, of course, these students had other students of their own. Take, for example, Irenaeus. So one century after another, we have this secured transferring of eyewitness testimonies about Jesus.
Well, no, this is not true at all. In fact, Irenaeus is the one that has identified these previous people as being disciples of John. These previous people that he mentioned are not the ones that state that they were disciples of the Apostle John. This is just some fuck a couple lifetimes after the supposed apostle lived, claiming that this apostle had disciples. I mean, I don't understand why people take what Irenaeus says about these people as being like the quote-unquote gospel truth. If these people were direct disciples of the Apostle John, then they should have said it, but they don't. They don't ever give any kind of indication that they were disciples of the Apostle John. Also, the fact that John was most likely written in the 2nd century and not by the Apostle John. Even the Gospel of John doesn't claim that the Apostle John wrote the Gospel of John. It was actually Lazarus, as we laid out before. But these are really poor examples of early church fathers that historically investigated the faith. Because, in fact, no early church father historically investigated the faith. Better representations would have been Justin Martyr, Athenagoras, Aristides, and Tatian. Let's just take Justin Martyr, for example. He did no historical investigation whatsoever. In fact, he asserts the exact opposite of historical research. If we look at Justin Martyr's apology, he'll tell us exactly where this information came from. So, in these books of the prophets, we found Jesus, our Christ, foretold as coming, born of a virgin, growing up to man's estate, and healing every disease and every sickness, and raising the dead, and being hated, and unrecognized, and crucified, and dying, and rising again, and ascending into heaven, and both being and being called the Son of God. Justin Martyr, Apology 131. So basically right here, Justin Martyr reaffirms exactly what Paul said, in that all of this information is only ever found in the scriptures. And that is the only reason why Justin is convinced about Jesus and his story. Richard Carrier in Not the Impossible Faith summarizes what convinced Justin Martyr about the veracity of Christianity. And it's not the fact that he historically investigated shit. Justin is telling us he chose Christianity because it was the only philosophy that placed God first, taught its doctrines for free, and didn't require any research or advanced study. He adds, as the final blow that converted him, the fact that Christianity was based on the oldest and thus most venerable of prophetic books. Richard Carrier, Not the Impossible Faith, summarizing the dialogue of Justin and Trypho, sections 3 through 8 and 7 through 8. So as we can see, the most educated Christian scholars past the time when any disciple or any apostle would have been alive did not historically investigate anything about the Christian religion. And this goes for all 4 of those educated Christian scholars that I listed. So no, nobody historically investigated the claims about Christianity, not even the most educated Christian scholars in the 2nd century.
These authors wrote of Jesus, proving that he existed, but also validated the writings of Gospels and the rest of the New Testament, showing that they are trustworthy documents.
But they don't. They don't show that they're trustworthy documents. In fact, the documents themselves refute the idea that they are trustworthy. The Gospels copy off of one another in order to build this story about Jesus. Mark being the first gospel, with the other gospels copying off of Mark either directly or indirectly. And you can't even save yourself with the Gospel of John, because John definitely knew all 3 of the other gospels. In fact, John's Lazarus was a direct refutation of Luke's Lazarus. What the 4 Gospels show us are vastly different Christian communities that grew up knowing different stories about this mythical Jesus that never existed.
So we can see Jesus clearly existed, because we have the 4 eyewitness accounts of the Gospels.
Okay, so let's go line by line with this. If the 4 Gospels are your evidence that Jesus existed, then you don't have any evidence that Jesus existed. All of them are either based on Scripture or they're based on previous Gospels.
The early Christian confirmation of these Gospels.
Nope, there was no early Christian confirmation of the Gospels. Nobody confirmed anything historically about the faith after the 2nd century. It was just, they took it at its word. If it said it in Scripture and the Scripture confirms the New Testament, then it was taken as true.
Then we have the writings of the Apostle Paul and the writings of the Apostolic Fathers. And it's because of all of this evidence that Christians can confidently proclaim Jesus certainly existed.
If that is all your evidence for saying that Jesus existed in history, then you have little to no evidence whatsoever. I say little because you could possibly use Paul to prove a historical Jesus, but I think that the arguments for Paul only ever considering Jesus to be celestial to be much stronger than the ones that say that Paul considered Jesus to be historical. But I do concede that there is an argument to be had over Paul. I find Evan's historical evidence for Jesus lacking in substance, lacking in truth. It's just lacking all around. It seems to me that all Evan did was read the conservative Christian scholars that are towing the conservative Christian line about Jesus and is just running with. This shows how Christian New Testament scholarship is quite nearly intellectually bankrupt. I'm not going to say that every single Christian scholar is towing this Christian line because their jobs depend on it, but a vast majority of this consensus definitely requires accepting that Jesus was a historical figure and refuses to address the problems with saying that. Evan's video is a perfect example of what's wrong with New Testament scholarship.